info. She is talking about ghosts hanging around what some say is a real-life haunted house in Metro Detroit.
Haunted houses pop up all over the place this time of year.
A new Wall Street Journal report profiles the many parents who think they can see ghosts, specters, and mysterious movements on their advanced baby monitors.
Baby crib.
I freaked out. I stopped what I was doing and I ran upstairs and I grabbed my daughter.
Heather says this so-called ghost scratched her daughter Lily and attacked her too.
You are tuned in to the Ghost Signal. Hello dear listeners, spirits and specters, and welcome to the Ghost Signal. My name is Jeff and I will be your control operator for this particular excursion into the shadows. This is episode 15, This House Sucks, in which we travel to visit Hal and Sabrina Haskins in their new home in Jackson Hill. After that, we have a creepy little story about strange shadows and mysterious knockings. The Ghost Signal has a website, theghostsignalpodcast.com, where you can find the latest episode, ready to stream at your leisure. You will also find a merch store if you like to shop, and there's also links to the Ghost Signal Discord server and Patreon if you would like to check those out. You can also email me directly at theghostsignalpodcast@gmail.com if you've got some spooky stories to tell. This episode, we return to a little bit of normalcy, a main topic, and some true life spookiness from across the internet after. Just this time, maybe. Somewhere in this great country I live in, there is a town where a family of 4 moved to from Ohio and immediately regretted it. The names of the people and places in this story have been changed to protect their identities. Prepare for dead air.
Dead air.
Hal and Sabrina Haskins, along with their children Damien and Michaela, were lifelong residents of Columbus, Ohio. Sabrina didn't exactly hate it, but she always knew that she was destined for change. Something different, something exciting, at least something interesting. When Hal came home from work one day and told her that he had gotten a promotion, with the caveat that they would have to relocate, she didn't even ask where. As long as it wasn't Columbus, it didn't matter. Turns out they would be moving to a small city named Jackson Hill somewhere in the American Southwest. She had never heard of it before, but apparently it was one of the U.S.'s most desirable small cities. A few weeks later, their beige Toyota Camry turned into James Circle and pulled into the driveway of number 4596. As they got out of the car to take a closer look, Damien simply stood there staring at his feet. When Hal asked him what was wrong, he just told him that he didn't like it. "What's not to like, buddy?" Hal asked his little boy, but he just shook his head and refused to say anything more. The house was huge. They inspected the kitchen with its recently updated granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, and spacious living room with beautiful hardwood floors. Upstairs, they all branched off to look at their new bedrooms. Sabrina peeked into the bathroom and noted the late 80s motif, especially the cheesy rubber ducky shower curtain. She knew that the second Michaela laid eyes on it, her objections would come fast and loud. A few minutes went by as Sabrina checked out the master bedroom and bathroom, and after marveling at the whirlpool tub, realized that her daughter was unusually quiet. She went into Michaela's room and saw that she wasn't there. For some reason, she was growing unreasonably concerned. That's when she heard her daughter's voice calling from the bathroom, asking for hand sanitizer since there was no hand soap available. As she left the bathroom, relief turned to confusion. Why hadn't Michaela said anything about the rubber ducky shower curtain? As Sabrina poked her head in, the answer raised even more questions. The shower curtain that now hung there was plain white, never a rubber ducky to be seen. 10-year-old Damien was sitting on the front lawn playing with dandelions when he noticed he was totally alone. He reached into his back pocket to retrieve his phone so he could play a few rounds of Fortnite before Sabrina saw him. You see, Damien is what's known as a parasitic twin, in that he absorbed his twin brother's embryo in the womb. He had overheard his mother talking about it with his father one night when he was about 6. She also said that she was convinced that Damien had eaten his brother and that he was inherently evil. So from that day on, he played into her fears, not letting her see him do regular, ordinary things that kids do, playing the long game for about 4 years now. She even named him Damien after the kid from the Omen movies. Instead of Fortnite, he found himself staring at a text message from a local number. He's literally lived here for 5 minutes. Who the hell would have his number? Sup. That's all it said. He decided that if that's the best a mystery person could do, then they didn't deserve a response. Flat out lazy, he thought. He stood up, put his phone back in his pocket, and decided to go inside and lick a window banister or stand in a corner in the living room staring off into space, or some other such prank to further scare his mother. His phone buzzed again. He took out his phone and read the new message. "I asked you a question, little man. Straight up rude." While internally debating on who the rude one was in this conversation, a third message popped up. "I can see you ignoring me." Damien's heart skipped a beat. He began frantically scanning his surroundings, hoping to see some asshole kid laughing at him from around a corner, but saw nothing. For once, the unsettling boy was unsettled himself, and he didn't like that at all. He messaged back, "Who is this? What do you want?" The 3 little bouncing dots showed up, indicating that whoever was on the other end was responding. Damien waited, and waited, but the response never came. He returned his phone to his pocket and headed inside. The yard was huge, and it took a couple of minutes to get to the house. The instant he put his hand on the screen door handle, the response finally came, and it was easily the most ominous one yet. All it said was, "You'll see." Monday came, and the first day of the rest of their lives had begun. Hal dressed himself in a suit only retired people, aka his customer base, would appreciate, kissed Sabrina on the cheek, and ran to his Camry. In his rush, he almost forgot his useless briefcase, which he only carried because the old folks expected him to. You see, Hal sold reverse mortgages to retirees. The kids were another story. In order to get them to their respective buses on time, Sabrina had to impose a military-like order upon them. Her morning routine regime would put North Korea to shame. On this first day, she was successful. Michaela was staring into her phone and ignoring anything that drew breath, and Damien had managed to not bite anyone. She found herself alone in the house for the first time, and got to work unpacking. Her SUV hadn't arrived yet, having been shipped separately from everything else, and it was making it difficult to even feel remotely settled in, even though she didn't really need it for anything yet. As she was unpacking, she realized that she needed a separate box for items to go to donations. Her darling husband Hal had never thrown anything away. Why does a right-handed man need 3 left-handed golf gloves? Knowing that this stuff would just wind up back in the closet if Hal caught wind of her clandestine machinations, she knew she had to find a good hiding spot until she had her car and could deal with his junk herself. After careful consideration, Sabrina decided that the basement, which she had yet to see for herself, was probably the best option. So a while later, after the box reached its capacity, she carried it off, intent on hiding it under the basement stairs. She only descended a few steps when she heard a heavy-handed thump, thump, thump on the front door. Slightly annoyed, she turned around and set the box at the top of the stairs, crossed the living room floor, and answered the door. Before her stood a woman in her 70s holding a plate of little sandwiches in her hand. She introduced herself as her neighbor Zephyr Rubens and came bearing the gift of porelainen, which are little Finnish snacks made with kale, onion, cucumber, and avocado yogurt. Sabrina invited her inside to elaborate on her story of how David Crosby gave her her name back in 1972, but Zephyr took one step over the threshold and immediately changed her mind. She said she had forgotten a previous engagement, handed the plate to Sabrina, invited her over for some kava tea later, and was gone. All Sabrina could do was shake her head and close the door. She took one of the sandwiches out and took a little bite, frowned, and choked it down. It tasted exactly like dirt. She sincerely hoped that the other residents of Jackson Hill weren't aging hippies with awful food who talked about their auras. Sabrina tried to church up the whatever they were by replacing the kale with bacon and put the plate in the fridge with a post-it note that said "Eat me" with a little doodle of a T-Rex beside it. This task finished, she returned to the box of junk and took it to the basement. It was really nothing special, an unfinished space with only a washer and dryer, the furnace, and what she supposed was a crawl space at the opposite end. She stowed the box under the stairs as planned, and just as she was about to leave, she turned for the stairs and froze. A man, over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a dad bod, came sauntering down the stairs with the box in his hands. "Where do you want this?" he asked. Sabrina was frozen in fear. She couldn't think or speak, so she just pointed to the part of the basement with the crawl space with a trembling hand. So off he went, dutifully trudged over to the indicated spot and set the box down. He stood there for a second, stretching his back, and hefted himself into the crawl space and disappeared. What the hell did I just see? Sabrina thought. Who was that? Whose box is that? And why did he go in there? She ran over to the crawl space, house slippers slapping on the concrete floor, and peered into the crawl space. It was barely big enough for her, so how the hell did a man 3 times her size get in there? She spent the rest of the morning outside in her new garden, not really doing anything productive, just so long as she wasn't in the house. She only returned inside when she felt her neck getting sunburned, and then just wandering about the house wearing a blanket as her only protection. When Damien returned from school, he consciously made the switch from normal 10-year-old boy to spawn of Satan, and stood at the end of the driveway staring at the house for about 5 minutes like some kind of idiot burglar, but when he realized it wasn't working, he just went inside. The house was so quiet that he was sure he was alone. Usually Sabrina was busybodying herself doing something or another, banging pots and pans around in the kitchen or vacuuming somewhere. He dropped his guard and decided that it might be safe to go watch SpongeBob, when he turned towards the living room and almost screamed. Sabrina stood right behind him, wrapped in her blanket and visibly shaking, eyes sunken and dark. For the first time since he could remember, she asked him how his day at school was. Fearing his mother had contracted the plague, he took a cautionary step back and answered, "Good." She then warned of standing water in the basement and to not go down there. He agreed and began up the stairs to his room. From behind him came his mother's voice again, soft but tired. "I'm glad you're home," was all she said. Damien couldn't help but crack a smile, almost against his will, at the sincerity of her voice. It was at this point he knew something was very wrong. That night, Sabrina lay in bed next to Hal, trying to focus on her copy of last month's People magazine, but she couldn't slow her mind down. How could she? After Damien got home that day, she snapped out of the dreamlike state she'd been in, and convinced herself that she didn't actually see a man in the basement. The evening passed as normal, and now at the end of the day, after a little bit of wedded bliss, she laid next to Hal, her head on his chest and about to fall asleep, when the bedroom door flew open. It was the man from the basement again, filling the doorway, and holding another box. He started to approach the bed, smiling and wiggling his eyebrows. Sabrina screamed. This time something inside the box moved and began cutting the packing tape from the inside. As the box leaves yawned open, she shut her eyes tight. She did not want to see what was in it. "Hun?" It was Hal's voice. She opened her eyes, and the man with the box was gone. He thought she had one of those dreams where you're falling, had a full body spasm, and startled herself awake. But she knew better. She had seen something that shouldn't have been there. The box in the basement she didn't put there confirmed it. She looked at Hal and asked if he believed in ghosts. Hiding in the hallway were Damien and Michaela. Smirking, he looked at his sister and said, "I told you she's gone crazy." Tuesday. That morning, the kids began their conspiracy to torment their poor, already neurotic mother even further into madness. Sabrina watched them get on their respective school buses and suddenly wished they weren't. All she ever wanted was alone time, and now that she had all that she could ever want, she didn't want it, although she wasn't actually alone. She meandered about the house, wondering what she could do to calm her nerves. She hadn't gotten any sleep the night before, and started to doze off every time she stopped moving. After weighing her options, she decided a hot bath in her whirlpool tub was just what she needed. With new resolve, she made her way to the staircase, walking right past the basement door, which, incidentally, since yesterday was barricaded with one of the dining room chairs. As she walked by, the door handle jiggled. Or did it? Was it her imagination or what? She took a few steps back, and it jiggled again. She repeated the experiment a few more times and started giggling at the absurdity of it. Shaking her head and regaining her composure, she made her way up to the master bath where her whirlpool tub awaited. The bathroom light was already on. Hal must have forgot to turn it off as he was getting ready for work, even though she knew for a fact this wasn't true. Whatever, she thought, and walked over to the tub. It was already filled with hot water for her. Again, Hal entered her mind, but if he had run this water, it would have gone cold long ago. A few minutes later, Sabrina woke up, face plastered against the cold bathroom floor tiling. More confused than ever, she stood up and wondered out loud how she got there. She looked back in the tub, which was now drained but still wet, indicating this happened very recently. Looking around the room, trying to get her bearings, the paranoia started to creep back in. In the quiet of the house, she heard one of the bedroom doors slowly creak open, and in her mind she saw the man with the box charging for the door. Panicked, she slammed the bathroom door shut and reached for her phone, her fingers instinctively dialing 911. The police arrived a few minutes later, calm but cautious. She told them the whole story, starting with the events of the previous morning. When the cops asked her why she didn't call 911 yesterday, she explained that she was convinced nobody would believe her, and they nodded in understanding. They all went to the basement to examine the crawlspace, to see for themselves how impossible it would be for a large, burly man to squeeze inside when a man appeared at the top of the stairs. It was Hal, briefcase in one hand and a bouquet of flowers in the other, and wearing an expression of confusion mixed with concern. "Is that him?" asked the cop. She shook her head no in relief. Meanwhile, at Freeling Elementary School, Damien was forcing himself to pay attention to his history teacher's account of the Battle of Thermopylae, based more on the movie 300 than actual historical records. Damien was, by all accounts, a certified genius. He was light years ahead of his classmates, but hadn't skipped any grades due to his mother's insistence that he be as normal as possible. This was a large part of his resentment for her, and he was nothing if not patient and methodical. He planned to have her in a mental ward by the time he graduated high school. He asked to be excused to the restroom and headed to the farthest stall available. He didn't have to go, he just needed some privacy to collaborate with his only friend and sister. Only a few moments after he texted her, he received one back, but instead of Michaela, it was from that mystery number again. "Shouldn't you be in school?" Fighting the irresistible urge to fire back at whoever this was, he simply blocked the number. He was in the middle of something far too important to concern himself with this pettiness. He put his phone back into his pocket and exited the stall, reluctantly shuffling back to his classroom. His phone buzzed again, from the number he had just blocked, but he didn't notice it. "You can't get rid of me that easily." That afternoon after school, the kids took public transportation to a Spirit Halloween store to pick up a few novelty magic tricks to freak out Sabrina. As they were standing in line behind a mother buying 3 Spider-Man costumes for her triplet boys, Damien's phone buzzed. Except this time it wasn't the mystery texter, instead it was someone far more unsettling. It was Hal. To his recollection, his father had never once texted him, and that's when he learned of Sabrina's 911 call. A wicked smirk etched itself across his face. That night at dinner, which consisted of Zephyr's reconstituted sandwiches and mostly baked potatoes, Sabrina sat over her plate with her head hung low. She knew what was about to happen. Hal, who was not exactly mean about it, made no less than a dozen dad jokes at her expense. She even giggled at a couple of them and started to feel better. He had his own way of cheering her up, even as the kids groaned with disdain at his humor. She almost felt back to normal again when Hal asked the kids in an almost mocking way if they knew that their house was haunted. Michaela just scoffed at him. "Pfft, as if," she said with a smirk. Damien, however, knew his time had come. He gave Sabrina his best devil child stare and softly spoke the word, "yes." Sabrina's eyes lit up. Hal asked him how he knew if the house was haunted, to which Damien replied, "Because they're hungry." Now Hal looked concerned. "How do you know that, buddy?" "Because they must be fed," was his response as he stood up from his chair with his sandwich in his hand, walked over to the wall next to the fridge, and held his dinner out to it. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. Sabrina screamed and ran over to her son. She grabbed him so tightly by the forearms that she left red finger marks behind and demanded that he tell her what he knew. Hal immediately jumped up from the table and ushered her into the living room, but not before he commanded the kids to get ready for bed. After she collected herself, she and Hal went upstairs to get ready for bed themselves. They sat in their bed in silence for a while, before she asked him if he had seen Damien make his sandwich disappear. He told her that he was concerned about her feelings towards her son, and brought up the idea that counseling may help. She did not take the idea that Hal thought she was crazy well, and contemplated sleeping on the couch, but decided against it when she remembered how close it was to the basement door. He also informed her that he would be working from home the next day so she wouldn't have to be alone. Although that did give her some small modicum of solace, there would be no sleep for Sabrina Haskins again that night. Downstairs, while Sabrina was listening to Hal snoring the night away, the kids sat in the living room discussing the night's events. Michaela was legitimately concerned for her mother's well-being and told Damien that he might have gone too far at dinner. He would hear none of it. He showed her the welts on his arms and informed her that telling Hal would be useless. While he had unending contempt for her, he regarded his father as a drooling knuckle-dragging Neanderthal. He wouldn't believe a word Michaela told him. Realizing he was right, she just put her face in her hands and began to cry. Damien got up to go back upstairs and walked around behind her. He whispered in her ear, "Stay out of my way." Michaela made a sound that might have been the word bastard, but he couldn't care less. Her participation in the plan was optional, and always had been. Stay tuned for part 2 next time, dear listeners. It's gonna be a wild ride, I can promise you that. Now for a weird little tale about what it truly means to share a space with someone you love, and all that comes with them. It's time to clock in for the graveyard shift. This story comes to us from Reddit user ShrekLover2828, and it is titled Shadows and Knocks. For brief context, I have been going through some adverse mental, emotional, and spiritual circumstances. I was seeing someone who claimed to be a pagan. We visited a supposedly haunted location when we were together, and this person is into witchcraft and other pagan activities, rituals, curses, hexes, etc. I'm a Christian, and I believe in the existence and manifestation of demons on this earth. I also believe my recent relationship with this person has attracted all sorts of troublesome entities, especially given our opposing spiritual beliefs. Demons like causing as much trouble as possible, and this relationship was certainly a breeding ground for demonic mischief. I'm at my grandmother's place visiting one time. I slept in a spare bedroom and closed the door, and nobody opened it for the rest of the night. I confirmed this with my mother and grandmother, who were the only other individuals present. I have an intense series of dreams about this person I was seeing. I woke up in a jolt, and I'm certain I'm fully awake, as I sit up properly and examine my surroundings in full consciousness. I even check my phone. It's around 1 a.m. That means my surroundings are consistent and I'm not dreaming except for one thing. The door is now 1/3 ajar. Even worse, there's a shadowy humanoid figure visibly standing 3.5 meters from me, visible from behind the space of the open door. I look for a solid 5 seconds and confirm to myself what I'm seeing. I'm unfazed and I do not respond with any emotion. I just accept what I'm seeing. This entity then appears to move to the side behind the rest of the door and is now hidden. I don't get up nor do I investigate, but only because I know chasing entities is not wise. I lie back down and I get back to sleep. When I woke up, I checked the door, which was closed as I left it before sleeping. As a bonus story, when this person and I were together and they stayed at my place, there was a strange knocking that sometimes happened. It sounded like it originated from outside, and happened at the most random and unexpected times. It was a knock, knock, knock on the window. I checked outside and nobody was there. There was no motive for anybody to do it, nor was anybody able to do it in time and disappear. I questioned this person and they claim it wasn't them messing around, and I also know I didn't do it. For the rest of that night, I questioned the knock and discussed it with this person, unable to explain it as anything other than paranormal. This person and I both feel uneasy, as if we're being watched while in bed, as if another presence or presences are among us. I then say in an assertive tone out loud that no entities are welcome in my residence and that they should leave. Soon after, that uneasiness disappears and we sleep fine. No other issues. What do you think? Spiritual activity or overactive imagination? We may never know. And that wraps up episode 15, dear listeners. Thanks so much for tuning in. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. With all the other shows out there, you chose this one, and I can't thank you enough. Visit the website, theghostsignalpodcast.com, to drop me a line, get into the Discord server, or check out the Ghost Signal Patreon. The Ghost Signal is exclusively produced by Jason Wilson, Patreon by Brooks Bigley, creative direction by Cassie, custom sound beds by GM Scherf, video editing by Hal, and I'm your ghost host with the most, Control Operator Jeff. Next time on the Ghost Signal is the conclusion of Hal and Sabrina's nightmarish story. Until then, dear listeners, ending transmission. Reach me at theghostsignalpodcast@gmail.com.
This has been a Grey Rooms production. Copyright 2021 and 2022.
The ghost signal is lost. Transmission terminated.